Hi, I'm Rohin, founder of Priceonomics. We help companies like big companies, small companies, startups, mostly tech companies, turn their data into content marketing that spreads. And typically that means getting picked up in the press, social sharing, maybe it hits the top of Hacker News, or hopefully it generates customer leads too, which is also one of the key things we're measured on. And this talk is about two things. It's really geared towards how data can impact distribution, but half of what we focus on is how you make the article and how you design an article to engineer distribution later on. And it's not just like an afterthought when we're creating the article. And then the second piece is that I think we all know if you publish something, no matter how awesome it is, especially on a company blog, like no one's going to read it. And that is very demoralizing and it really stinks. And how do you make that not happen? And we spend just as much time, I think, on the distribution side on making sure our articles spread. But I'd like to really stress is you kind of have to do both. Similar to the last talk, you have to make really good stuff that is designed in a specific way. And there's no like hack to make a bad blog post spread. Like you have to actually do really good content, but then mirror that with good distribution tactics. So we work with a lot of companies, and we also just like blog on our own about cool data that we find. And when working with companies, the key thing we focus on is like what proprietary data does your company have that's a byproduct of your business. It's not like the main thing you're out there selling, or it's not like the most valuable secret that you would never share on the internet. But like, what do you know that other people want to know, that they might find valuable or they might find interesting? And the hallmark of our strategy and what we encourage companies to do is just give away great information. Like put it out there and have it geared towards something people are going to find interesting, whether it's customers, whether it's the press, whether it's people sharing it online, and have it geared to being valuable to them. And that's the sort of work we do. We have a particular bent on trying to make the press pick up stories and trying to like put your data and be newsworthy. So we specialize specifically in taking companies' data. That's like, there's a lot of different ways to give away free information. And I think a lot of the speakers earlier spoke about like the authentic things that they know that they want to put out there. And our thing is like, well, you have this data. You are an API, you are a marketplace, you are a SaaS dashboard, and information goes into you, and how do you process it into a story? The bad news is that we've tried all sorts of different things. We've tried like long-form storytelling. We've tried great industry analysis. And spending a lot of time, 40 hours, analyzing your data, coming up with a story, finding out the data doesn't support that story, starting over, reanalyzing the data, spending hours and weeks, and then finally starting to write, and then finally starting to publish it and spread it. Like it works. Like this is newsworthy information. And if your goal is to compete in SEO, getting inbound links, trying to generate press, it's like a very effective strategy. And I'll show you some examples of that. But it's a lot of work up front. So when we first started, we especially, definitely took us 40 hours. And sometimes we would really hit, and it would be a big success, and like the New York Times would write about it, or Hacker News would pick it up. And sometimes we would swing and a miss. And so we went back and looked at every 1,000 blog posts that we had ever written, and tried to classify them, especially the data-driven stories, and put them into templates, like what was the common pattern behind any of these stories we wrote. And we have a bunch of templates, but there are 5 that I wanted to share with you here that are applicable, especially to a B2B audience. And the first one, and I'll bring up some examples later, but like the first one that is just like the easiest thing to do is geographic variation. And so taking some metric that is a core part of your product and just showing how it varies by city, by state, by country. And that's like, there are a lot of press that covers like a local market. There's also people care about where they're from, their country, their city. And as a result, this is like a tried and true sort of template for content sharing. The second is secret data about something people care about. And it's a little like coy, but I'll show you an example next that like kind of illustrates that. Like things that you might think are really boring because you are working on it 24/7, but other people don't know those things. A third is trend related to the news. So say you have a travel search engine. Like right now you should be doing a blog post, bookings at United Airlines plummet. or maybe it didn't plummet, maybe it went up, maybe there was no impact whatsoever. But all of a sudden, like, you were taking data about the search traffic going on your product and turning that into an article that I guarantee you, no matter how the data turns out, will get hundreds or thousands of press mentions. Like, someone's going to do that in the next week, and it'll be popular. Fourth, this is probably the most effective template for B2B companies, and that is just taking data that is going to be valuable to businesses. Like, imagine what is the ideal cheat sheet one of your customers wish they had, and they would make a ton more money. And see if you can somehow create that as a piece of content marketing and put that out there. And number 5, when in doubt, just rank stuff. Like, there's a reason Forbes ranks 400 people under 40 in every different industry and by college, It is guaranteed to cause sharing. It's guaranteed to cause other people to write about it. And while it can be used for evil, it can also be used to actually make things interesting. And so when in doubt, rank things. And so the goal of this is I haven't really talked about how do you make an article spread, but I've showed you how to design an article that is likely to spread. So one of our customers is Y Combinator, and this is a good example of secret data. And what we did with them was analyze all the keywords used in anonymous versions of their applications for the last 10 years. And we published this article that was the most popular thing they wrote last year that just showed the trends in the keywords. People used to mention MySpace and Craigslist and eBay and advertising a lot, and now they mention Slack and APIs. And this wasn't giving away the keys to the castle, but it was really interesting data that only they had access to. And so what are things like that your company has? Another thing is just ranking stuff. One of our customers is a platform for recruiting developers where they can take tests. And we had all this metadata about the people taking tests, where are they from, who are they, how are they doing on the tests, what language are they scoring in. And so we just created ranking tables by country. And it got hundreds of thousands of views, hundreds of press mentions. It was around the time of the Olympics, so there was who would win the programming Olympics angle tying it to the news. And I don't know if that part helped, but it probably didn't. But the main part was we just ranked stuff, and this was not that easy, not that hard to do. It was just taking the core metric of the product and showing variation around it. And the last template I want to talk about is just what's valuable data for a business. And this is an example of one of our clients. It's a SaaS company that is for measuring how effective outbound sales emails are. Does anyone open the emails? Does anyone respond to them? How does it result in a lead? And so this was just a series of experiments about, does name dropping in the subject header help you get more leads? And it turned out it did. Just mentioning gratuitously a customer's name or an investor's name, apropos of nothing, increased response rates 200%. And so that's actually pretty valuable to someone that sends emails all day trying to get business. And got picked up in the press, got picked up in sales blogs and marketing blogs, and it also generated customer leads. So before switching to distribution, I want to give you some of our hacks in terms of making any blog post better and being more likely to spread. Basically, the main thing I've realized after doing this for a bunch of years now is that the articles that do the best are ones where someone can read an article and think, do they have anything to say about this? Does it either affirm or contradict an existing belief they have? And so if it's something that they've never even thought about, it's not something they care about in any way, they've never thought about it once, it's unlikely that they're going to share it, it's going to be popular. The other thing is that people have a limited cognitive capacity to follow multiple storylines in a blog post, especially they're probably at work skimming your blog post, and they're not really going to follow all the nuance that you have in your head about it. And so, try to architect a post so that there's one thing people can take away from it, that they can read it in the intro, and you're sort of guide them towards it. You are building up the case again about it, and then at the end, bam, I know that I should name drop customers, and I'll have a 200% conversion rate. So one other point that is very important, and I don't think it's that intuitive, is that you can always maximize the shots on goal of an article by ranking things and putting, if you could show, in the example about bookings falling at United Airlines, you could show that overall bookings have fallen, but then you can also show every city that is falling the fastest. And then local journalists in each of those cities would say, oh, well, in Charleston, South Carolina, bookings have gone to 0. Like, people are really upset about that here. And so you've increased the number of shots on goal that local journalists might cover it. And common tactics to that are cutting things by programming language, by industry, by profession. Any way that you can cut the data, you increase the number of shots on goal in terms of the article spreading. And lastly, write clearly. Just read the topic sentences at the end, and imagine that your readers are doing that, and they should be able to follow the article just having read the topic sentences. And the titles matter a lot. We A/B test all of our titles using software we built that measures click-through rate on different titles. And well, our philosophy is that the title should get the main point of the article across. That it's going to signal to a reader that this is going to be not boring, and it's going to be worth your time to write about it. And that's sort of the philosophy we ended up coming to with titles. Because that's what will show up on Hacker News, what'll show up on Facebook or Twitter, is just the title. And it's really important. That is making your best case for why someone should invest time in reading your article. So the second half of this talk, I want to talk about distribution. OK, you made something really good, and you've increased the chance it's going to spread by architecting an article in a certain way. But nothing happens until you actively take steps on distribution. And at Priceonomics, we have about 1 million visitors a month that are just coming to read interesting content, data-driven content from us. But even still, nothing happens until we enact something called the bump, which is maybe 1,000-ish people see it somewhat simultaneously. And then after that sort of level, that anything good from that piece of content that could happen does happen. Someone might start writing about it, which causes a chain reaction of journalists writing about it. Or a reader of yours that's really active on a subreddit might submit it there. Or someone reads it and knows their friend is in the market for the service and sends it to her. And so we know when we publish something, even with a large audience that's there for content, that nothing's going to happen until you enact this bump. How do you get there, especially when you're just starting off as a company? There's 3 levers we have for spreading content. And the first one is journalists, which is traditional PR. I'll go a little bit into how we do that. Second is supernodes, which are sites like Hacker News, Reddit. And then the last is your owned audience. And that would be your Twitter list, your Facebook lists, your email lists. And I'll dive into it more, but I sort of am putting this in the level of difficulty it is to enact each of these. It's pretty straightforward for you to get up and say, I'm going to email a journalist. Going viral on Reddit or having a massive email list takes some time. First off, every time you publish an article, expect you have to send it, especially if it's a data-driven article like this, to a lot of journalists. It could vary depending on your industry, but we tell people as a rule of thumb 50 to 100. Thumbtack came to our conference about content marketing, and they said the first time they did a data study, they sent it to 40,000 journalists. And that was written by, that was their co-founder when they were 6 people emailing it to journalists. And it sort of put them on the map in a lot of ways. And so it's going to be more work than you are prepared to do, and it kind of stinks emailing people you don't know, but you just sort of have to do it. One thing we find is that it's helpful to write the pitch in that email before you've written the blog post, because you'll go in your inbox, write out a pitch, and actually be extremely bored by it. And you're I can't imagine that this site is going to turn around and write about this. So write it, rewrite it, until finally something clicks in your brain that this is a pretty good article. I think someone would genuinely want to read it and write about it, and then start doing all the work. And then lastly, your conversion rate on this is going to be very low, 5% maybe. And so you're just hoping, you send it to 100 people, maybe 5 of them write back to you, and not all of them will even write about it. But if one of them does, that can enact a chain reaction, because a lot of journalists follow other journalists for ideas on Twitter, or just by following them online. So it's kind of unfun work, but you should do it. The next really important channel is something I call supernodes, which are sites where you don't have to convince the whole world to like you. Hopefully 5 to 10 people like you or like the content. And then if that happens, then it can open the floodgates to tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people who are going to spread your content even further. For us, Hacker News is in the beginning when we first started, something that a lot of our articles ended up on. The first 3 articles we wrote hit the #1 spot on Hacker News. The first 8 articles we wrote hit the top 5. And so now today, we don't really rely on that as a channel, but in the beginning, it was really, really big for us. Reddit is our #1 source of traffic. Like there's no larger source of traffic on the internet than hitting the front page of Reddit. Like content marketing and things like that don't really spread on Facebook. Like there's no going viral anymore like it used to be. But like Reddit is, what we say is basically going viral. But there's other like channels like this. There's Dig, there's Metafilter, there's smaller ones. For any given community, there is some sort of channel that is like a subreddit for what you're interested in. And so the key point here is just like make sure it's appropriate. I think someone mentioned that they post a lot of their previous speaker, a lot of their content to Hacker News. Like, you have to really understand and participate channels like this to understand if your article is going to be successful there. Don't just spam these channels. Like, really understand them. And then lastly, today where we manufacture the bump is from our owned audience through lists. And that's things like Twitter, Facebook, email. But I'd say it took us, 3 or 4 years of like building up an audience before we could post it to our site, send it to our email list, and that could like cause that bump. Until 3 or 4 years happened, every time we were relying on emailing it to journalists or making sure that like hoping that someone in our community would post it to Reddit or Hacker News. And now like we don't really rely on that as much, but it took a while. The last thing I want to leave you with about that is experiment about your email list and how to capture more people. So we, for us, we could get rid of Twitter and Facebook and it would have no impact. But email is like by far our biggest channel for how content spreads. We try, we're somewhat anemic, our email list growth. And then one month we decided to experiment on like the positioning of like where you put the email capture box. And one friend was like, why don't you try pop-up? And I was like, that would never work. I've never put my email in a pop-up, and that's what we did. And so I'm ambivalent about that, but experiment is what I'd say take away from that. And so lastly, a lot of people say blog every day, try to get out a lot of content. If you're trying to do data-driven content like this, try to do one really great article. And try to do all of this like 40 hours and try to really spread it. And then if it works the first time, I think you'll find it's addictive. Like it's really fun when everyone's sharing, the company's like, oh, we were just mentioned on this, like, in the Wall Street Journal, like because we published a study. And if you do it once and you really succeed at it, I think it becomes addictive. Thank you.